7 o'clock, I'd like to call this, what are we, April 25th, Board of Supervisors meeting order. Please rise for the pledge of allegiance.
today. No, a couple of weeks ago, but.
Yeah.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all for coming out this evening. Normally John Stahl leads us in a moment of silence, and don't want to get into John's business, but he's not able to make it this evening, and if you're so inclined to keep you and Wanda in your prayers, please do so. Is there any citizen participation at this time? Hearing none, we can move on to opening of the 2022 road bids. Brad?
I'm going to open them in the order in which they came in today. So the first one I got was J. Paul Road. It kind of shocked me. This is Glen Hall. Yes, we did. We got 5. That's what we had last year.
And we're going to talk all these real quick till they get home.
This is Pence.
Didn't start like that, no?
No, we didn't. We're not getting any better. We're not getting out of the cotton. Well, a little bit. And that is EK Services.
Who's that last one from, Daisy?
New Enterprise.
You familiar with them?
New Enterprise, yeah. They bought Hemp Brothers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Johnson is in the back.
Oh, okay. Hey, how you doing?
You might want to look over them kind of the options, what you end up finally end up doing. You don't have to award it now, you just need to decide I mean, it could be the lowest one, will have the lowest options too. And I'll have to make sure, I did not check for the big bonds, but they're probably in there, that's pretty standard. Just wanted to make sure.
When was this planned, this thing?
Not till after, school is finished,
Okay.
like after the 15th, but, and the guys have pipes to put in too.
Okay. 'Cause quite frankly, there's a lot here, and if we don't need to make a decision this evening,
That's what we advertise.
we did. Okay. Numbers wise, it tells us.
But we will be getting, the rescue. We will be getting, the rescue.
Yeah.
Line to line, down.
Yeah, maybe we can take the two lowest and make them.
That's the best one. Line to line. So we come to go just on what we, just line to line.
See, they all quoted identical quantities.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, the bids were all the same, it's just what you decide, you know, the options.
Line to line here.
It's the option is for New Valley.
And so there's the option for me then.
For New Valley.
Yeah. You thought I had two options, but one, two, and three. We're gonna do a whole road, part of the road, and just a little bit of the road. That will definitely like the other one.
Yeah,
Is that lowest bid, is that something we can award or not?
with the rest of the money, we can,
I know we just don't get some of the department, but,
oh, yeah, definitely.
okay.
Did we make that move yet? Did we? Did we?
No, we haven't done anything. I was going to report when it's time for the, treasurer's report, but I already filed the expense report. I did everything I had to do. There were so many glitches with it, but, finally the treasury got it, some of those glitches on that, and it needed to be done by April 30th, and it's done. I got it all filed, so I'm glad.
That's good. That's good.
So it's on the agenda for later to award it, but I just wanted to make sure that you looked at all the options that were there.
So location of work, and these 5 quotes are all for the same areas. New Valley Road from 850 to the municipal building, which is approximately 4,000 feet by 20. New Valley Road from 850 to a point approximately 2,130.
That's
2,130 by 20, I'm sorry.
That's another portion that you're, if the bids come in too expensive.
And then New Valley Road from the point to the municipal building, 1870 by 20.
And then Power Road going there, or going, yeah.
So we've got 5 bids. Polk Road and Son is $574,481.62. Glenn Hallbecker is $617,406. Penzi Supply is $787,502. EK Services is $750,677.35. And New Enterprise is $514,105.
What was Falk rate again?
$574,481.62.
That's what I thought. Third, actually.
Pardon?
No, second, I'm sorry. I was trying to put them in order.
Is that for just New Valley?
That's for New Valley, Tower Road, all Tower Road, and up to, only the pay part, and portion
Is
of
that
landscape.
correct, or are you reading your bid wrong?
I think you're reading my number wrong, New Enterprise's number wrong.
Okay, look back through there, and that must not be the total on that
That
page,
was-
which it's supposed to be, but look back through them.
May I make a comment? I know it's just time, but the legal notice that was posted in the paper says awarding of the contracts is anticipated to take place. I'm just thinking if supervisors need more time to look this over, as a citizen, I think that'd probably be the best course of action. That's my comment.
Yeah, because you, for that comment here, right here, that's the total right there.
Yeah, that's, okay. Now, let's look at the others because the others similarly,
That was the total right there.
okay, sorry, Dave, I'm getting you now.
Okay, that's okay,
For New Enterprise,
okay.
$746,555.00.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Are they all did that way, they didn't put the total
They
in?
didn't put the total, they just did the word bar.
Yeah, I'll
Okay,
tell you what,
I
this,
Why don't you
I'm thinking it would be
just,
premature.
we could just have a special meeting just to award the
That's what we're
bids.
gonna have,
Simply.
because we're gonna have to cycle the whole.
Right, and you're gonna have to
Yeah,
decide which
yeah.
option to go with.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we table this until a special meeting. We'll digest this.
Right.
You second?
I second, yep. We gotta figure out all the numbers and stuff.
Right, exactly. I mean, you might decide to give Tower Road to someone else, because that's entirely, you're just gonna have to really look through
Right,
them.
we'll have to look through them and see what the.
Yes, that was okay, so we corrected New Enterprise to 746, just so we can share with everybody what we're looking at here. So the total for, which one do you have?
Well, I don't,
Or is there not a total
I
one?
don't know if it's a total, because we have it all down to different roads.
Total.
Okay, then just meant.
Why don't I take them and
Put
calculate
anything
Three
on
it?
options, and there's a total,
Okay.
there are three options, and then there's Tower Road.
Okay.
Yeah, there's just too many,
Yep.
too many options,
And then
Sorry about that.
too many roads. I mean, this is one of the largest that we've done since time. I mean, the largest amount of roads.
Yeah,
No.
okay.
Alrighty.
So the numbers you read off, we don't know if they're grand totals or what they are.
That's the
correct.
thing, I have to go through, we'll have to add them all up, Jimmy. Yeah, unfortunately.
Okay, well, my bid forms broke out that way with
Right, we got to yours was easy, but the other ones.
all the other ones, okay.
Yeah, we'll have to add the other ones.
Okay, well, that takes us past opening of the road bids, approval of the minutes. We had a couple of typos, things like small things, but nothing major, so I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the March 28th. Brad, second. It was odd not having a third again.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, persons to be heard. Greg Whitmer is not here, but Tina Kurnow, pronouncing that correctly?
Yep.
Okay, from SEK with the financial audit report for this year.
No,
Or,
last year.
missed last year's.
I knew what you meant.
Thank you.
So, my name is Tina Cornell. I was the in charge on the audit this year. Craig Whitmer is the partner in charge that oversees the audit and ultimately signs off on the report and the results of the audit. So what you have today, what we're going to go over, is not the whole financial report, all the details, the letters, all that. It's just going to be a scaled down version of the results essentially, and some key items of comparison from this year to last year. So when I say this year, I mean 2021, last year 2020, just because based on the audit, we did the audit for the 2021 calendar year. So in summary, you go to the next page, it's an unmodified audit opinion. That is what you have over your financial statements, and that is basically saying that it is a good, clean audit opinion. It's the goal of an audit. It means that we didn't find anything that required us to modify our opinion. So that's a good thing there. You had a surplus in all of your governmental funds. We'll look at that in a little more detail. And a decrease in your solid waste fund. And there were no findings. We'll look back when we get further. There was one comment that we had in our management letter related to the ARPA funds that you have received and the continuing and ongoing compliance regarding those funds. But outside of that, there were no findings in the way of internal control deficiencies, anything that we found that we suggest you would change or do differently otherwise, so that's a good thing as well. So then next, we always remind you that the independent auditor's report that's at the very beginning of your financial statements is essentially, for this year, it's as of 12/31/2021. So we audited up to that point. And it means that your financial statements are materially correct. It is not an opinion on internal controls, and it is not an opinion on a fraud investigation. We always like to remind you that essentially the goal of the independent audit that you have is strictly for purposes of making sure your accounts are materially correct, they're being reported accurately, they're with the right category, the way the state wants to see it, things like that. So it's very much a financial audit. Also included in your financial statements is management discussion and analysis. That is the only unaudited piece of the financial statements. That is prepared internally by management. We are not allowed to prepare that as part of the audit. So we provide the audited numbers to Daisy. She prepares that document, gives it back to us. We review it to make sure there are no inconsistencies or anything that conflicts with the information in the financials. But otherwise, we just read through it, make sure it makes sense, it's complete, has all the required information in it, and then we incorporate that into your financial statements. That is the part of the financial statements that has comparative information. The rest of your financials are a single year reporting, so that gives a little bit more reader-friendly, plain English kind of information and comparison from the audit year to the previous year, and there's a section where you can look forward as well for any upcoming events that you're expecting that you would want the reader to know about. So then looking at your numbers, the main takeaway on this page here, the reminder that I want to point out, this is your governmental activities. This is where we pull on and convert your internal records to include capital assets. It would include debt as well if you had any debt, but you currently do not have any, so it's just the capital assets. So it's not truly a cash basis in and out from that perspective. We are pulling on those long-term useful assets that you have, and then they're being depreciated. So overall, the current assets increased due to the positive change you had in your governmental funds. And when I say governmental funds, that means your general, your capital, and your highway aid. Your business type activities is your solid waste or your trash fund. And then a decrease in your non-current assets, because while you did have some activity this year, you did start doing some road projects, other purchases, your depreciation expense exceeded that in the current year. The next slide is the business type activity. So this is showing essentially your balance sheet of your trash fund. And your current assets had just a slight change, and then your capital assets became fully depreciated. So that's why there's a 0 there. You still have those capital assets. They're just fully depreciated from a net value standpoint. The next page is your general fund analysis. So this is just your general fund, and this is on the fund level. So more so what you would have seen at your meetings throughout the year and at year end. We look at the 2020 versus 2021 actual, and then 2021 actual versus the 2021 final budget and the variance comparison to that. So overall, you can see you have an increase in your revenues. The two main focus and sources of that were an increase in your taxes, not your real estate taxes, but your earned income taxes. And also compared to your budget, you always budget conservatively for your taxes, especially those because of the unknown associated with them. So from a budget standpoint, you came in above what you were expecting for taxes. And then your intergovernmental is an increase there from the prior year as well as budget, because that is where your ARPA funds are lying. You received them, you had not used them yet in 2021, which was the norm for pretty much every municipality that received those funds. They were waiting for that final rule before they committed to use any of it. So they just got it and held it until they can start utilizing it. So you didn't budget for that because it was unknown at the time that you were getting it, how much you were getting. So that is, again, an increase from the prior year actual as well as from your budget. From an expense standpoint, you also had an increase in your, from actual standpoint, from prior year to current year, and a slight decrease or negative variance essentially to your budget, which was mainly in your highways. You started doing some road projects, a little bit delayed in some of the activity that you were doing, but you did start back up again. Obviously, you talked about that again tonight, trying to stay in line with budget and not using too much reserves. So you budget for it, but then when you get the bid documents and you see the actuals, sometimes things get delayed to help save further. So that was just kind of similar in 2021, getting things started back up. 2021, you already were seeing the significant increase in costs across the board for pretty much everything. So that was just kind of that standpoint as far as comparing to the budget. That next page, the narrative there is just what I was explaining in my presentation here. Capital reserve, looking just at the actual from 2020 to 2021, a slight decrease, and that is strictly just a function of lower rates of return that you're seeing on your investment across the board in savings, CDs, any kind of investment is just not having as high of a return as in the past. So while you still have funds that you have invested, you just saw a decrease there, which is no different than any other municipality. No expenditures used out of the capital reserve fund in 2020 or 2021. You had transfers in both years, which were your normal budgeted transfers, the transfers of your tax collections to help save for future costs. Your highway aid, your 2020 to 2021, and then compared to budget. Again, you have in your revenues a small decrease, small fluctuation in your interest, a small fluctuation in your intergovernmental. Essentially with the highway aid, your revenues are investment income and your liquid fuels. You really don't have any other revenue sources coming into that fund. And then you did have a payment out of the road projects, some of the road work that you had done and purchases for salt, things like that. Some of that was funded out of your highway aid in 2021. There was nothing that was paid out in 2020. So obviously an increase in your expenses there. Looking at your solid waste. So this is your trash fund. Looking here last year to this year, so 2020 to 2021, and then compared to budget. You did have an increase in your revenue compared to the prior year and compared to budget. That was eaten up with increases in your expenses, mainly basically from an actual standpoint, your contracted services increased significantly. You covered that in your budget because you have an agreement, so you know what you're going to be paying, but that was a pretty healthy increase in cost that you saw for that fund. little bit of interest income, and then some transfers as far as allocating non-payroll activity benefits, and then your change in net position. You budgeted no change, you had a $372 loss, essentially. So still a good year in the sense of not using up too much reserves. So just trying to keep that in line with the costs that you know and can account for. The next slide is your equity. This is just going down all of your different funds and where you have your residuals allocated. From a general fund standpoint, you did have an increase in your restricted. That is essentially from mostly related to the ARPA funds that you received. While the use of them is mostly unrestricted, there are a few caveats to that. There is a time limitation on the use of those funds, so that's why that has been carved out into that category. Most of your general fund balance is unassigned and can be used for whatever needs necessary. Your capital reserve fund is completely either reserved or committed based on your millage and the funds that you, through board action, save for future purchases. Highway of the fund is completely restricted. You can only use that for certain purposes related to road activity. And then your solid waste can be used for solid waste activity purchases or operations. Looking at your footnotes, note 1 is your summary of significant county policies. This footnote doesn't change unless you change your policies. So it's pretty cookie cutter language, same as it was last year. Just explains the township, how you operate, how you report activity. Note 4 is your capital asset note. That provides a lot more detail on the beginning balance of your capital assets, the purchases you made, any disposals, which I don't believe you had any this year, and then the depreciation expense that is charged. So that footnote will show you, while I mentioned your trash fund assets are fully depreciated, there's nothing on the balance sheet for that, the statement of that position there. It does show the gross up of that activity on that footnote. So that kind of just helps provide the information to show that there are still assets there. It's just there's no residual value associated with them. Moving on to the management letter. This is one of the letters that is external from the financial statements. This is the letter where, while we say we do not provide an opinion on your internal controls, if during our testing we find a deficiency in your internal controls, we are required to communicate that to you. And then we also use this letter for anything else that we think could be useful for you, whether in decision making, looking to the future, expectations, things coming down the line. So I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation there were no findings, so there's nothing reported in there. The only thing in that letter, which we consider to be informational, is a comment about the ARPA funds. And so Daisy has already mentioned, she filed the report. That's kind of our biggest reminder that's included in that is the reporting requirements that go along with that money. Whenever you get federal money, there's always strings attached. There's always compliance, there's always reporting. And the first round of reporting here for that is the end of this month. So we're making sure all of our clients are complying with that requirement because you obviously don't want to have to turn that money back over. So you did what you needed to do for that, and then it will be ongoing reporting after that subsequently as you're spending the money to let them know how you're spending it. The rest of the letter are the graphs that we normally provide. This gives you a 5-year analysis of some key items, key operating items of the township. Your cash and investments are your first graph. You can see most of it is centralized in your general fund, seconded by your capital reserve, because that's your savings fund. Next slide is your revenues and expenses, and then the residual. So this is the township as a whole, all your funds, total revenue, total expense. You can see that the past 5 years you have had a surplus. The last 2 years more so than the previous 3. The previous 3 you were almost break even, but the last 2 years you did have a decent surplus. 2020 mainly because you didn't do any road projects, you didn't really do much in 2020, but you still collected for the most part, the same amount of revenue that you had 2021. While that did start up again from a road project standpoint, you received the ARPA funds. So that's going to be a 2-year process. You got half in 2021, you're getting the other half in 2022, and then that is going away. Then it will just be spending the money. So that is only a 2-year spike in revenues. It's not something that is planned on or expected to continue in any other capacity past that. Then you look at the next 2 graphs are your revenue and expenditure trends. This is by category, and you can see from a revenue standpoint, your taxes make up most of your revenue source for the township for the past 5 years. More than likely for the foreseeable future, that is just how local municipalities work. They are mainly funded by local taxes, whether it be real estate, earned income, transfer taxes, whatever type of taxes you could collect. They are pretty much funded mostly by that. And then intergovernmental obviously helps. Charges for service you have, that's your trash fund. Not everyone collects that and has that as an internal or an internal fund, but you do, so that is why your charges for service is somewhat high from a revenue standpoint. But then looking at your expenditures, your highway expense is your largest expense with the exception of 2020, since you didn't have much activity going on there. But that is, again, normal. Most municipalities spend a lot of their money on maintaining roads and infrastructure. So that is your highest expense, seconded by your sanitation, in this case, your trash fund. The next 2 graphs then look at just 2021, but it's a pie graph to kind of show you from a percentage allocation of where your funds are coming in and where your funds are going out. So from a revenue standpoint, it shows you that just over half of your revenue came from your taxes, and then seconded there by your intergovernmental, which this year was partly due to the ARPA funds, so that will be high again in 2022, and then drop back off after you stop receiving that. From an expense standpoint, you can see on the current year, almost 40% of the expenses went to your highway expenses, the road projects, salaries and benefits, things like that, for 2021. Then we go on to the other letter. The other letter is it's called a required communication letter. We call it kind of the catch-all. Everything else that wasn't communicated anywhere else is in that letter. It basically is a very standard letter unless something needs to be communicated. So what you have this year and what you have historically had is the required language and no changes to it. This is where we indicate any significant estimates or disclosures that are in your financial statements. If there were any disagreements with management in performing the audit, there were none. Any difficulties in performing the audit, there were none. Any other findings or issues that we felt needed to be communicated to you, there were none of those. It acknowledges in there that you provided us a signed management representation letter. That is the letter that we receive at the end of every audit, where you identified to us that you provided us everything we needed to perform the audit. And then any adjustments that we make from the time we get your information to what you see on your financial statements and DCD report are communicated to you, so you can have that stepping stone to show any changes. Usually it's reclass activity. The state is very specific with where they want to see things reported, and it's not necessarily in line with how municipalities budget their activity. So sometimes there's some realignment with that, but nothing internally that you need to change, just strictly reporting changes from that perspective. And then in summary, basically to recap what I started with, you have the unmodified audit opinion on your financial statements, the surplus in all of your funds except for your solid waste, and there were no findings. The DCD report was filed previously ahead of the April 1st filing deadline. The financial statements were just finished up recently. Once we get the management discussion analysis, the attorney letter that we get back that the attorney identifies there's no open claims or litigation cases that could negatively affect the township that may need to be disclosed in your financials. We got all that stuff wrapped up. There wasn't anything with that. So So we are officially complete with the audit, and everything that you need to have, you have as of now. So, any questions on presentation or anything I've said or anything that you're not sure about?
I don't have any questions at this time.
Okay.
Digest it more. Thanks for, once again, doing all this, and Daisy, we're working together and getting this done to understand the result. We appreciate it. And normally we have questions at the end, public comment, but we're not gonna hold you to the stuff here. So, we have John. John, you had some questions?
Yep.
Regarding the audit?
Yeah. Did anyone else have any, I guess, first?
Everyone else, if they have questions.
Okay. No one else has any, question, I guess, for the auditor? That'd be, I guess, Tina. Can you explain the difference between what you do and what the elected auditors do? And like, I know you said, hey, we're just making sure it meets the requirements to go into the state government reporting. But, you know, I guess, who's responsible to make sure that township is following things like contracts and ordinances and resolutions that they made, that they are following them themselves with money and everything like that? I'm guessing that wouldn't be you.
No, from a compliance standpoint, that is an audit that can be done. That is not the audit that we are engaged to do. We do strictly a financial audit for looking at the numbers, not necessarily how the numbers are spent, but the fact that they were spent and paid to the people they were supposed to be paid to, and reported accurately from an external reporting standpoint. The compliance audit, even the elected auditors aren't required to do a compliance audit. The only requirement for a compliance audit would be if you have significant debt. A lot of times banks may require some additional audits over that activity. If you have significant grant funding, especially as part of the comment for the ARPA funds, you're not at that level, but if anyone expends more than $750,000 in an annual year of federal expenditures, they are required to have a single audit. That is, that reporting requirement is placed on local accounting firms, where you would then engage us to perform that audit, and then based on our audit, that gets submitted up to the federal government. They don't do their own audit. They rely on local auditors to do that. The only exception would be your liquid fuels for the highway aid fund that you have. There is an audit, a separate audit that's done by the state every year. They come in and they do look at a lot more detail as far as because of the restrictions and requirements of how you spend that money and what you can and cannot spend it on, they do look at that. And then there are pension audits where they will come in and look at pension activity, recalculate what their MMO requirements are, make sure that you paid in what you're supposed to pay in. So there's tripling of compliance type audits that are out there, but this isn't actually that.
And I guess the elected auditors would, start those other ones, like if they would see something or they feel there might be something, they would be the ones to start it, obviously not you, because this is just your part right here, the financial part.
Yeah, the supervisors would have to come to us and engage us to do that kind of audit.
Okay.
If the elected auditors would want to do something like that, then there isn't necessarily a body they would report to.
Yeah, they're their own oversight.
Yeah, essentially, that would be the case there.
All right. Next one is the tax revenue increase. I know this year, looking at last 2 years, there wasn't anything in the from the taxes, there wasn't anything in the capital reserve fund or the special revenues fund. But now this year, the taxes are now in the general fund, the capital reserve fund, and the special revenues fund. I guess, what was the reason that now there's those two extra amounts in those other spots versus the last 2 years where they weren't? Or is it just, okay, we took that and then it's dispersed to the other two? So I wasn't sure if that it was 530 pretty much for the last 2 years, and then now it's 517.
Well, the general fund is always going to have tax revenue.
Yep.
Because the general fund collects not just local real estate property taxes, but transfer taxes, earned income taxes. So there's always going to be taxes that are collected in the general fund and stay in the general fund. Then because you have your millage associated with other individual activities, then that it could still stay in the general fund if it wanted to, even though it's separately identified. You choose to allocate it, not allocate it, but transfer it over to the capital reserve to completely get it over and out of the general fund, so there's no confusion on if it can be spent or not, and what it's spent for. It gets moved over there for reporting purposes for that standpoint. There are usually timing differences of when it's collected and when it's turned over, especially the millage ones, because people who are almost delinquent, they hurry up and pay their taxes in December. So then by the time the tax collector gets it to you, and then you can get that allocation right and transfer it over, there's usually always a little bit of a time lag from that standpoint. But it would only be the general fund and the capital reserve fund. The highway aid fund doesn't have any taxes in it.
Okay. So is the highway aid fund the special revenues fund?
That should be.
Okay, because that has 30.
Yeah.
I have the advertisement if that's, I was just wondering because the 517, what
So
was
you're looking at the
advertised?
DCD report.
I'm looking at what was in the actual advertisement in the paper.
So that is based on the DCD report.
Okay.
For the DCD report, the state requires that if you have any special tax, so basically if you levy any kind of tax that's not for general purposes, you have to report that in a special revenue column, even if internally you keep that in your general fund. So we make one of the entries that you have is a DCED entry, where we take all and summarize all that activity and pull it over so that it goes to the right column on the DCD report.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess my question with that is though, the previous 2 years before that, it was 530 only in the general fund. But now it's 517 plus 22 plus 35. So is that the equivalent of what was 530 before?
Probably.
Okay.
It probably was, yeah, and
All
then
right.
just the timing of
Right.
the actual
Okay.
transfer.
Yeah, I was just confused because it's 40,000 more. Okay. That one. All right. Next one I have is solid waste fund questions. Can you please explain how employee expenses are calculated, or what you've been told about how they're calculated, especially in the solid waste fund? Since I'm concerned because the supervisors and treasurer felt it necessary to raise the fees for the trash collection this year based on what was last year. So I guess, can you explain how that was? And my biggest question is things went up, things went down, comparing them from last year's audit to this year's audit, it doesn't make sense, so I was just wondering what your take on it was, on that.
Well, from a personnel standpoint, what gets allocated is just based on an estimate amount of time that's spent with the activity and reporting the activity, maintaining that fund, paying the bills, so then essentially that ratio is what is used to allocate, which could change each year depending on how much time. There's really no way for us to audit it per se, because we're not here every day. We don't actually know for sure how much time is being spent. We just kind of make sure it looks reasonable. But from a cost standpoint, that cost is pretty minimal to that fund. The main cost in that fund is the contracted services, which has nothing to do with the internal activity. It's the agreement with Penn Waste, I think, whoever is your trash collector, and the increases each year in the contract for that to then cover that cost.
Right. And I guess my concern is some things went up when in the general fund they went down. Like things would be like workers' comp insurance went up in the solid waste, but it went down in the general fund. Or the pension plan contribution went up 400 from 600, 66% increase, but in the general fund it only went up 1.2%. That's my red flag. Like, what's up with this? You would think they'd correlate together. I guess one of my biggest questions, solid waste change in amount. Can you explain the revenue amounts, collection fees, state grants, transfer? It looks like we were only under by 372, but I know last year's budget it was allocated that, we're going to have to transfer in a whole bunch of money to cover ourselves. I'm just wondering, was that money transferred in? Because nothing was said when they did the resolution. It was just, whatever money it was, and I know the audit would have that. I saw there was a transfer, but I know that's also making sure money's in the right spots, so.
Yeah, the transfer that's seen in the solid waste fund this year was not at all related to the budgeted transfer. That was just aligning
Yep.
the personnel and.
The right buckets of
yeah,
money kind of thing.
Yeah,
Okay,
benefits and, yeah.
okay. So it was the collections did not equal the contracted amount by only 372 or whatever that amount was.
Mhm.
Okay. And
Is this your last question?
yes, it is.
Okay.
Yep. And can you please tell us the ending fund balance for the solid waste? And then any funds committed to it? I don't know, I only know the ones that are on here, which it looked like, I just want to confirm. The solid waste ending budget was $294,651. And was there any, I think we have one other account that also has money allocated to it, which is actually in the general fund capital reserve, I believe.
Yeah, the solid waste fund, that's the total amount.
Okay.
And that is all, there's nothing restricted for that. It can be used for whatever necessary needs for the operations of the solid waste fund.
Yeah, and then I think there was one, I mean, I guess, and you don't have the audit, but it was $106,000 for future trash expenditures fund. But I'm guessing that's not dedicated, it's just earmarked for it.
Probably,
yeah,
yeah,
okay.
that would probably be in the, maybe the committed,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, probably the committed, because restricted is external restrictions.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
Last question is, when is the audit report actually going to be available for public viewing? It sounded like it wasn't done yet because you're still waiting on the solicitor, but I didn't know, was there a
Well,
time frame or is
it's
it?
done for our purposes now. They have it now,
Okay,
today, as of today.
Okay.
They have it.
Good.
Yeah, and then it'll just need to be approved, and then.
okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Tina.
Sorry, we ran a little long there. Anybody else have questions? Okay, hey, thanks again, Tina.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
And I know you guys haven't had time to kind of dig into all the details yet yourselves either, so we always say afterwards, if you have questions, just let us know, and anytime throughout the year, Daisy's good at reaching out to us, trying to make sure that she's reporting things properly, so that doesn't have to change later, so.
Okay. Okay. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot.
And you did mention that even though I know what John is going to try to say, is that the reserves, we have so many reserves, why are we raising the trash? But yet you saw a significant change in the collection contract as far as increase. And you also mentioned that we only have in that fund, the proprietary fund, barely a year's worth of budget. So we're not, yes, we have a nice margin, we want a good margin, but we're not overfunded. And that's why we want to not prevent that from happening. You can lose a little bit. This year we budgeted again to use some of the reserves. So we can insulate against I'm just going to throw this number out, a $10 increase to people versus a $2. I mean, we don't want to do that to people. But at the same time, trash collection is a real problem. I'm telling you, it's not just pet waste.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
The cost is ridiculous, so we want to keep that margin. I just feel that that's very important.
There's a
And I don't remember exactly where you're at with your contract with them, but obviously you can expect when you
They're
renew.
cheaper.
They got,
It's
I mean,
gonna-
they're
just
getting
like with
labor,
with the
fuel,
growth phase that
everything.
you're
I
seeing.
mean,
It's
And
high.
this is what it was, this is what you're expecting, and then you gotta double it, so it's not gonna be any different from that standpoint. So you also wanna take that into consideration, if you're getting close to the end of that contract, know that the next contract is gonna be
Their
significantly.
contract runs out the end of next year, so we'll be bidding probably next, after we're done with the audit.
And like you said, nothing against them, it's
No,
just,
no, it's
that's what
not.
it is.
It's
and
not
you
just
have
in
to-
Pennsylvania, it's
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
all everywhere.
Yep,
Thank you, Tina.
Yeah, thanks again. This was actually well done.
all right, thank you.
Moving on to municipal reports, zoning code enforcement report, we're not gonna have one.
No, they changed their software, and so till we get in the swing of it, they're gonna be doing end of the month, which actually, once we get into it, will be so much easier than trying to remember from the 15th of one month to the 21st or whatever, it was before. It's going to be at the end of the month now, along with all the invoices. It will actually be nice. We're just now getting into it, so we didn't get one for this time, but Brian said we'll be like my treasurer's report the preceding month. So, we'll be getting one for the May for April. So we will have that, or April or behind. I think Brian said he's going to add whatever was missed. I think a small billion, if we even did anything in March, but he will cover all of that and we'll have it for the May meeting. And then we'll be, going forward, we'll be in the right sync then with everything. Excuse me, but he did make sure, he did say, make sure to tell the board why there wasn't a report.
Thanks for that. Sewage enforcement report, this looks like a different format.
That, they actually, it's really weird how it all fell together. They actually changed their software also.
Okay.
So maybe it's something engineering firms are doing, but that's a new format also for FSA.
Okay, so we have a summary here?
No, it's not like before. It's actually nicer, but yet you're not going to get the summary. You're going to get the address, if it's 1234 Valley Road, and it's going to be this thing, and 5678 New Valley Road, it's going to list each activity. So you'll be looking at pages as, I think there's 3 separate locations that you had activities.
Yeah, so 650 Pine Hill Road, invoice total $250. $34.50 Valley Road, $150. And $17.75 for Valley Road for $75. $75.
No, I mean
Oh,
total.
total.
Mhm. 75.
Road report, Brad.
Okay, we coordinated last weekend with Marysville, they did the interspecies for us.
I was gonna ask you.
So they did like all the developments and some other side ones. Pressure,
How did we pay them?
we would pay them with, knowing from them.
Okay, that's, I knew we were doing trade-offs. Thank you.
Pressure wash removed snow equipment from number 1 and number 4, so they modified on the entire length of Cove Road. Met with the bidders on the road projects, patched potholes throughout the township, cleaned up down trees on Pine Hill Mountain Road, and repaired signs out in Pine Hill and the linear areas because they just keep abusing it. So. And clean ditches down here on New Valley Road.
Thanks very much. Nancy, do you have a rec board report?
Yes, at our last meeting, we set the dates for all our upcoming events. And the first 2 events are the Fishing Derby on May 21st from 9 to 10:30 a.m. And the second event is the Strawberry Festival on June 12th from 6 to 7 p.m. All our events are free, and everyone's welcome to attend. And if you have any suggestions for new events, please give them to us, because we're always trying to find something new that we can do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Emergency management report, I don't see Jim or Mike here, so I assume we've heard from Jim.
I have not heard from him.
Financial treasurer's report.
Okay, more numbers for you. The general checking account began with a balance March 1st of $113,185.32. Had receipts of $82,512.48. We had to replace a check that was lost by Shermansdale Ambulance for $24.83. We had expenditures of $58,221.81, interest earned of $11.88, leaving us a balance April 1st in the general checking account of $137,512.70. The penny and general checking account, which is held in that just because of the better interest rate of return, had only interest activity and had a balance April 1st of $561,735.40. American Rescue Plan Fund monies had only interest activity of $21.19 and had a balance April 1st of $124,797.26. And as I said before, our reports are done. And the main goal of getting them done, even though we didn't have any expenses to report or any allocations, was mainly to get the board to, their decision in there to go with the standard allowance. And I sat through another webinar last week, and right after that I thought, you know what, I'm just going to stay tonight and I'm going to finish this because it was fresh in my brain, and it wasn't that difficult, and I didn't run into too many glitches with the program. But anyway, they had everything correct on ours. There's some poor girls out there on secretaries, and they're just having a heck of a time because something was wrong and they're trying to get the federal government to change it and make it right. So God bless them, because it would be a mess. But anyway, this is as of April 1st, and we're looking for our second allocation, probably towards the end of June. I don't know if they'll be on time, or they got our allocation last year, like June 28th or 29th. So they're saying around the same time. It may be a little after that, I don't know. But the board, the standard allowance election was taken, and PSATs and the auditors, as I spoke with them, said you'd be crazy not to do that. So again, I'm thankful the board, wanted to do it that way, because the reporting is so much more complicated for everyone, and it's much more restricted. The funds are much more restricted, which is why the reporting is more complicated. So thank you very much, but that's all taken care of for you, and that's the only time that you can choose that election. So that's why it was so important to get that done. The liquid fuels checking account is pretty much dormant this time of year and had interest activity of $1.7 and has a balance April 1st of $540.61. The liquid fuel savings account had interest activity, began with a balance March 1st of $2,660.83, had interest activity of $2.23. We did receive our liquid fuels allocation for 2022 of $120,699.64, and that was transferred to a CD at Penny and Bank at 0.35%, which gives us a little more interest, and also is still just as accessible as if it were left in the checking at getting 0.05%. We're getting 0.35%, which is still pathetic, but it's better than 0.05%. So that with that being transferred out, the exact amount that came in was transferred out. The balance April 1st was $2,663.06. Because if you count the interest in there, that's why it went up slightly from March 1st. That's all I have. Does anybody have any questions? Nope.
Okay, thank you, Daisy.
Thank you.
Moving on to resolutions, resolution 2213, authorize use of Visa to pay DEP online for registration of our 2 underground fuel tanks.
Yes, this is the payment for the actual certificate. It's already out in I had the guys, because they have it screwed to the wall out there. It has to be publicly displayed by the underground. And it's already out there and paid for. We are required to do it online now. So I use our Visa for that. And this is just authorizing that and noting that. So,
What do we pay for that registration?
$100 for 2 tanks. but we had to pay, previously it was $125.40. That was, yeah, there was one just a couple months ago, that has to do with the insurance, that indemnity fund that we paid in. And supposedly we're helping with that.
It's supposed to work, actually.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. We have a pretty good monitoring system. Which is
Mine
good.
probably leaks out of the fund. Yeah, so I'll make a motion to approve the resolution 2213. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Moving on to resolution 2214, renew 2 maturing CDs at Penny Bank into like terms road projects, Parks and Rec, 11-month easy access CDs at 0.35%.
These are just renewing in like terms. They're already in that easy access 0.35% CD certificate. And Tina even told me I didn't have to do this, but I like to do it. It kind of keeps it at the forefront and it makes, gives the documentation of where it's at. And say, hey, what do we do with that? Oh, that's right. Why didn't that change? Why does the CD look like it's from an older CD? When actually Penny has a thing where you can just renew it and it just kind of stays in there. So this documents it. I think it keeps it, it keeps better track of it, keeps them organized, because we do have quite a few CDs. That's what this is doing. It's just staying as for designated as committed for park rec funds and road project funds. And it's accessible whenever you might need it. And one of the reasons I did want to say why it goes into capital reserve, why we move those funds, the money's levied for road equipment. We move that because if it stays in the general fund, you can't budget from your general fund. So if I put it into capital reserve, you can budget by a transfer from your capital reserve. So, and it also, like I said, it kind of organizes so the board can see what monies are available and committed in the capital reserve. Capital reserve fund for us is all CDs. It's all future expenditures that are capital expenditures for the future. So I just thought I'd explain that.
Appreciate that. I'll make a motion to approve resolution 2214. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we're moving on to new business, awarding road resurfacing bids. We talked about that at the start. Need more analysis. Yeah, Daisy, can you do us a favor and take that data that's, because it is just, you put it in Excel format so we can do it side by side.
Yeah, I can
And
do
all the
that.
options and then pull out what we came for.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
thank you.
I don't know if I'll get to it tomorrow because I'm supposed to go to the convention tomorrow.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to RFPs for Township Engineer. So Brad has a statement to read because we did have a little bit of a situation that we're currently working with our solicitor to clarify things. But Brad, if you want to read your statement, please.
I make a motion to rescind my vote made on the March 28, 2022 board meeting to appoint Dewberry as Rye Township Engineer due to the appearance of a conflict of interest. My adult son works for Dewberry. Dewberry agreed and has withdrawn their proposal to avoid any issues or controversy. So I make a motion to authorize the secretary to go out for requests for proposals for a township engineer.
Second that. Thanks for that, Brad. Who all were they, the same ones that they went out to before?
Yeah, I can send that and I didn't send it to two, I could send to them. There's a couple others I could look around and.
Yeah, because again, we didn't have.
We didn't get
much
it, yeah,
response on
they
the
didn't
last.
respond very well.
So, yeah, that's.
So to get, I'll check our county convention book and see what some of the other local municipalities.
Okay.
I had looked through that before, that's where I got with the engineering, but Yeah, I'll send out more than 5. I'll try to get maybe 7, 8.
Okay, thank you.
So maybe I can do all
Yeah.
that. It's not difficult to send out a request for proposals.
Yeah, let us know who they're going up. I'm curious who all
Okay,
we have
sure.
this. Okay, moving on to item C, potential acquisition of 45 Cove Hill Road. And what that's about is there's a blighted property that the township is looking into discussion with our solicitor about acquiring this property. The folks, my understanding is, are interested in donating it to the township for covering some of their fees that they're incurring through this. So just want to let folks know that we're looking into it. There's no decision that's been made. Just want to let folks know that we're looking into it. So I don't know, need a motion to approve the looking into it or I don't
You
think we
could,
can
but I don't
this
think
one.
you
Yeah,
have to. If you're just looking into
Yeah.
it.
Okay. Okay.
It's like when you're looking into buying a tire or something. Then if it's for a piece of equipment you're looking into, so you let everybody know you're looking into it. And you'll have to make, if you decide to purchase the property, then that needs to be a public meeting.
Item D, delivery of the mobile carts, trash collection. Brad, you've been instrumental in coordinating with those folks. Do you want to give an update on that, please?
Did he get hold of you today?
Yes, it did.
Oh, good,
Yep,
good.
I forgot to tell you. You can put the numbers, people can put the numbers on the trash.
Okay, good.
And they're supposed to be delivered out on the 27th and the 28th. The trash carts are supposed to be.
Okay, so folks can put, just to clarify, folks can put their house number on, they're allowed to, now, who's the owner of it? They still own the cans?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, that's why the question is. if they can-
Yeah, that's something people have asked me, is what if somebody runs over it, or,
They said they'll be unlucky.
yeah, or
It's no cost to
it's
them.
completely their responsibility, not the township's. We do not own them. If we went with another contract in a couple of years, they would come in and take all those containers, or try to get all of them back. Unless they, I don't know if they make
Might cost them
arrangements.
more than they were worth.
Yeah, I know. They might try to sell them to the new, I don't know what they would do, but they're their containers. We do not own them. We don't have any liability for damage. Neither do the residents or occupants.
So since they're delivering them this week, next Tuesday will be our first day
Yes.
using the new system.
Yeah.
Okay.
Except for Kimmer Drive.
Yeah, I know.
Mr. Olvera's not here tonight, but they've got to work on that one. So it's going to stay as is for now.
Thanks for that. Item E, announcement, spring cleanup is May 6th, which is Friday from 6 a.m. to 1:45 p.m. and Saturday, May 7th from 8 a.m. till 12 noon. And Nancy Sunday has been kind enough to, you're going to be paid, you're not. Appreciate the offer, but thank you very much.
You have to give me the list I need.
Yes.
It's out there in your drawer now.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, we were good. We were going to let them know that the offer was away, so thank you very much.
Except you have to bring donuts. I'm just
We'll bring
kidding.
them.
It's a little early to go for donuts,
I know, I
unfortunately.
know.
I don't know if they're even up there yet.
We'll find it.
Either
Thank
that
you
or I'll
very
go
much.
with the donuts.
Thanks, Nancy.
May 7th, gardening day at 1 p.m.
That's over at the park.
Okay. May 16th, 7 p.m. supervisors meeting rescheduled earlier. And then May 21st is the fishing derby, 9 till 10:30 a.m. at the Sportsman's Association. May 17th is primary election day from 7 a.m. till 8 p.m. And May 30th, the office will be closed for Memorial Day. Trash collection will be on Wednesday, June 1st. All right, approval and payment of the bills, please.
April general fund checks 17314 to 17328 in the amount of $7,404.62. There were no expense checks voided. That other check that I told you about was not voided. It was replaced because I I said to Tina, what do I do? If I void that, it would change the bottom line of my my financials, and they took all those figures already. So she told me how to handle that. Even though it is voided, the check was lost, and it was replaced. I just did a journal entry to take care of that in this year, and the entry zeroed itself out. So I just wanted you to know how I handled that, because I did tell you that check was lost. I didn't want somebody to get confused there. Payroll checks 8039 to 8045 in the amount of $4,888.48. Payroll checks 8046 to 8051 in the amount of $7,316.78. And there were no payroll checks voided either.
Okay, make a motion to approve payment of the bills. Brad, do you have a second?
Second.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We already had this second citizen participation portion.
May I make a comment? It wasn't citizen participation. I just wanted to address a question that Mr. Schulze had for the auditor about the responsibilities of the elected auditors versus the appointed auditing firm that we have. This is from...
But you are one of the elected auditors.
That's correct, yes. This is from Act 69, Section 917 of Pennsylvania General Assembly. It's very long, so I'm just going to kind of paraphrase, okay? When an accounting firm is appointed by the supervisors, the Board of Auditors, elected auditors, shall not audit, settle, or adjust the accounts audited by the appointee, but shall perform the other duties of the office. The other duties would include us setting the rates of pay for supervisors, which we've discussed in other meetings. So that's my comment.
Okay. Thank you for that.
And one thing I did want to say too, I can't say I remember everything and all the details, but the auditors, when there's a new contract, they want a copy of that. So they want like our trash contract, or any time when money is expended over a period of years, they look at our road bids, they take all of those files. They may not audit them completely, but believe me, they watch. Well, I had three CPAs this time. Now, they did bring the last day, they brought some guy that had just come in. He's an accountant right now, but they're training him. But yeah, they really go through very well, and they scan everything in. They want, ask Nancy. She'll tell you. They take copies, they do take copies of our contracts.
Okay, it is 8:13 and the meeting is officially...
I did have one question on the road bid. Yeah, sorry, I missed the beginning, so. But I did have a question on the road bid. Could you tell me what items are on the bid? And it was muddied in the beginning about where on New Valley it was. It was 850 to the township building, then 850 to a point 2,000 some feet, but then there was also the municipal building, and then I missed what you were saying there at the end. So I guess the locations on New Valley and then the actual items, what they were.
You have a copy of the ad, John?
I don't have it with me, but
Okay.
the ad didn't have had some of the items, but it just had 3 options and the quantities for them.
Okay.
So that's why I didn't know where on New Valley the work was, so.
Okay. I don't know it off the top of my head. I can reread it, or it's on the...
If they're available, if I can take a photo of it, that way then I don't have to write it.
Not until they're awarded.
Not the bids, we're not talking about...
Well, I don't, even if you have a blank
The
bid.
advertisement is what I was talking about.
Right, if you have a blank of the bid, the document that they're supposed to fill out that's blank, I can just get that. That'll have all the stuff that they would have.
I think you could get the advertisement much quicker, and we can provide you that blank form.
I guess the advertisement that's in the paper, though, isn't the same that they actually get in the actual document, the bid document, correct?
What did you get in there?
I don't remember, honestly. I don't remember. I know I put the different options in there because I had to.
We understand your question, John. We'll follow up with you with it via email.
Okay. Sure.
Response.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it might, I'm not sure where what you'll end up doing.
Right, but...
That's why we can't give him until these are accepted.
And there's no intention to do that, just what did we send
In
out?
general,
What is
what
the ad?
everybody bid
Yeah,
on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because Because I just didn't know you had New Valley to length, then there New Valley to a point, and then there was the other one, municipal building to something. If you have that, that would be helpful too, you know, you could read that off or whatever. It would be on.
That copy.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all. Meeting is adjourned. 8:15.